All right, everybody, welcome back. You ready to go deep?
Ready when you are.
Awesome. This time we're tackling indie music. You guys wanted to know what it's all about, so we did our homework.
Articles, podcasts, even dug into some old zines. It's amazing how much there is to learn.
And some of it, honestly, totally surprised me. Like, did you know bands like Nirvana and Radiohead, before the stadiums and everything, were indie? Total DIY and everything.
It's crazy to think about, right? And the thing is, they're not alone.
So how did they manage to blow up while staying true to their roots? It feels kind of contradictory, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's something we see throughout indie's whole history. This back and forth, like, can you be successful and independent at the same time? But before we get too deep into all that, maybe we should, define what indie even is. I mean, we throw the word around, but what does it actually mean?
Right, back to basics. So,
Yeah.
like, Indie 101, what's the deal?
Well, at its core, it's about independence.
Okay, that makes
Indie short for independent, right. And what that means is these artists, they aren't signed to major labels.
So no big record execs breathing down their necks.
Exactly. They have this creative control that you just don't see a lot in mainstream music.
So they're free to, what, experiment more, take risks?
Totally. They're not chasing radio hits or trying to please some boardroom.
So their definition of success is probably different too, right?
Definitely. They're building a community around their music, finding an audience that connects with their sound.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
So when did this all start? When did bands start saying, you know what, we're doing it our way?
You can trace it back to the late 70s, early 80s with bands like R.E.M. They were really doing things differently.
So what were they doing that was so different? Like what set them apart?
Well, think about the music scene back then. Everyone was chasing MTV, aiming for that top 40. But R.E.M., they were all about college radio. They were making zines, building this dedicated fan base.
Wow, so they were like the original influencers before social media was even a thing.
Totally. And that DIY spirit, that whole way of doing things, it became a blueprint for a lot of indie artists.
So they laid the groundwork, basically.
Absolutely. And then in the 80s, things really started to take off. College rock became this whole movement with bands like the Pixies, Husker Du. They weren't just making music, they were like building a scene.
A scene?
Yeah, like a whole community. And then you see these independent labels popping up. Rough Trade, 4AD. They were all about supporting this new wave of music.
It must have been so exciting to be part of that.
Oh, I bet. There was this energy, like something was happening, something different.
So if the 80s was building the scene, what about the 90s? Was that when indie went mainstream?
The 90s, oh man, the 90s were huge for indie music. That's when grunge exploded. Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, they were everywhere.
Okay, so that's grunge. But what about, like, alternative rock?
Right, so alternative rock, bands like Radiohead, they were also blowing up. And suddenly you have all these indie bands on MTV, on the radio, selling millions of records.
Which kind of goes back to that question, right? Like, Can you be indie and mainstream? Does it even work?
Yeah, and there's no easy answer. Some bands, they totally embrace the mainstream success. Others, they tried to stay true to their roots, but it was definitely a struggle.
I imagine it would be. It's almost like a paradox, you know?
Totally. Like Pavement, for example, they were getting pretty popular, but they always kept their sound raw, experimental. They weren't afraid to be weird.
So they proved that being indie wasn't just about being underground. It was about, like, an attitude.
Exactly. It was a mindset, a way of approaching music. But then everything changed again in the 2000s. The internet happened.
Ah, yes, the internet, the great disruptor.
Right. Suddenly you didn't need a label, you didn't need a studio, you could just make music on your laptop and share it with the world.
So that must have been a game changer for indie artists.
Totally. Platforms like Bandcamp and SoundCloud, they gave artists this direct connection with their fans.
No more gatekeepers.
No more gatekeepers. And then, of course, you have Spotify, which, while it's controversial in terms of royalties, it did give listeners access to this massive library of independent music.
So did all of this make it harder to define indie music? I mean, you had everything from lo-fi bedroom pop to, like, experimental electronic music, all under the indie umbrella.
Yeah, the lines definitely got blurred. And in a way, that's kind of the beauty of it. Indie became less about a specific sound and more about, like, a shared ethos.
So what were those shared values? What tied all these different artists together?
Well, for one, that DIY ethic was still there. A lot of indie artists were still self-producing, designing their own merch, running their own websites. They were in control.
And even with this global reach, they could still connect with fans in a really personal way.
Absolutely. That direct connection, it's something that's always been central to indie music.
So what about the music itself? Were there any common threads in the sound?
Well, like I said, it became really diverse. But one thing that stood out was this focus on authenticity. The lyrics were often really personal, confessional. They talked about real struggles, social issues, even politics.
So it wasn't just like background music, it was something that made you think.
Definitely. And that's another thing that sets indie apart from, say, mainstream pop. It's not afraid to be raw, to be challenging.
So indie music wasn't just about the music, it was about like a whole worldview.
In a way, yeah. And that's reflected in, like, the whole festival scene, too. Coachella, SXSW, Glastonbury. These are massive events, and indie music is a huge part of them.
What is it about festivals that draws indie artists and fans?
Well, I think it's this sense of community. It's a place where people can discover new artists, see collaborations across genres, and just celebrate this music that exists outside the mainstream.
It's got its own little world.
Yeah, and it shows that indie music isn't just a niche scene anymore. It's this cultural
So it's
force.
definitely come a long way since the days of college radio and zines. What do you think, though, about the future of indie? Especially with all this new tech like AI and VR.
Oh man, the future is wide open. We're already seeing AI being used to create music, and VR concerts are becoming a thing. And who knows what new platforms will emerge for sharing and discovering music.
Do you think all this tech will make it harder for artists to stand out?
It's definitely possible, but it also creates all these new possibilities for creativity and collaboration. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out.
So what do you think will be the biggest challenges for indie artists going forward?
Well, figuring out how to navigate this constantly changing landscape, for one, and how to stay true to their vision while embracing new technologies.
Do you think the meaning of indie will change?
It probably will. It's already been evolving for decades, and it'll keep evolving. It'll be interesting to see what new forms of independence emerge.
So it's kind of an exciting time to be an indie artist, but maybe a little scary too.
I think both, but that's what makes it so fascinating. There's this sense of possibility of pushing boundaries.
So to everyone listening, as you explore indie music, think about what draws you to it.
Is it the energy, the lyrics, the sense of community?
Is it the fact that it's different? That it challenges the norm?
Because ultimately, that's what indie music is all about. It's about doing things your own way, connecting with people who share your passion, and creating something real, something authentic.
And who knows, maybe you'll even discover the next Nirvana or Radiohead right in your own backyard. So keep listening, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep supporting the artists who are making the music you love.
And never be afraid to go against the grain. Who knows what you might discover?
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
See you then.